Hello from Hollywood. My name is Anthony Boyer. I've been a talent agent in Los Angeles for the last 15 years. And today on Take Fountain, we're going to talk about the differences between a talent agent and a talent manager. Here to help me with this week's video is my good friend, talent manager extraordinaire with Centera Entertainment, Jess Canty.
Thank you. Hi.
How you doing?
I'm great.
So what people don't know is that every episode we've done, you've been sitting right over there.
I have been.
Cracking the whip.
I have been. I have been managing the videos.
Yeah, that's really true.
But I'm glad to be on the side of the camera with this one especially.
And we're going to pull you in a little bit more moving forward. We just wanted to establish this beautiful face first. It's called branding. Look it up. So today we're talking about the differences and similarities between talent agents, which is what I do for a living, and talent managers, which presumably is what you do for a living. Would you disagree?
Yes, that is what I do for a living.
Yeah. So I think the first thing to talk about is to define roles, right? Presuming that you have both an agent and a manager on the team, because not everyone does. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of crossover between our jobs because some people only have one or the other.
Right. And I think this is, how we see the ideal working relationship with an agent and a manager.
Yeah.
I think it's why we've been able to work together so well. But I guess the caveat being that not every agent is necessarily going to see this relationship the way we do. Not every manager is going to see their role exactly the way we see it, but we just know how successful we've been able to be together for the clients we share. Yeah. And in our relationships, my relationships with agents and yours with other managers. And so that's sort of how we're going to be talking about that.
Yeah, and I think it's important for the actors to help define the roles of their team also, because ultimately you are the CEO of your own company and we are on your team, but ultimately you are running your team. For an agent, typically our primary job is to find work opportunities for an actor by securing auditions, at which point, you will go and audition and hopefully book the job, at which point we will negotiate a contract. Usually, if there's a lawyer on the team, that can be a little bit different. And then once the contract is signed, we help make sure that the terms of that contract are enforced. That's it is the process of finding, securing, and protecting an individual sale. Whereas for a manager, wouldn't you say it's a bit of a more macro focus?
I think that's a really good way of separating the two. And, in the context of you are the CEO of your acting business, we really see the agent as the VP of sales, whereas your manager ideally should be kind of like your chief operating officer. And that's really how I see my role within the team, is that, my primary job actually is not to find work for my actors. Now, if I have an actor that doesn't have an agent or a great agent like Anthony, of course, I'm going to be helping with that. But once we have someone on the team, assuming that you have a manager before you have an agent, once I have someone on the team, I'm actually happy to turn that responsibility over primarily to the agent and move more into that operational support. So what does that look like? That is overall strategy for your career. Anthony brings 2 or 3 opportunities, maybe 2 of them conflict with each other. He just wants to know which ones you're going to audition for. The conversation about the strategy around which ones and what you want to do and what's better for the direction you're going, that is going to fall with me, the manager. Branding, for lack of a better word, right? Your photos, your reels, what's up on what casting service, do you need new photos? Do you need to cut new clips from something? All of that really falls under sort of the operations part of being a manager, so that Anthony can go do his job as your VP of sales. And our conversations really are around, hey, do you have everything you need? How is it out there when you're talking to casting about a client that we share? Is there something that you're missing? Is there a segment of the market that you think that they could go into if they had, a clip of them doing something funny or whatever that is? So managers, I really see as, like we were saying, sort of the macro, the overall strategy, the branding, and helping to make Anthony, whoever your agent's life is easier. That's really how I see it.
Well, not just the agent, but managing the entire team,
Yes,
really.
yeah.
If there's an attorney, if there's a publicist, the headshot photographer, all of those pieces are really under the purview of the manager.
Yeah, absolutely. And, to that point, let's say you have a commercial agent that's at a different agency than your theatrical agent, right? And so the coordination and the communication between those two companies, again, if you have multiple opportunities and you kind of have to decide between them, ideally your manager should be talking through that with you, and you should be talking through those things with your manager, and then they're going to help facilitate, maybe saying to the theatrical agent, like, hey, they're going to pass on this co-star because they're down the road on this national commercial and it's going to make their health insurance or whatever. So we're there to facilitate kind of the tough conversations with your reps too.
And I think it's helpful when you hear that to think of the inverse. If you don't have a manager,
right,
it's sort of incumbent on you to lead those conversations and those discussions, which can be a little uncomfortable because some agents get territorial.
Mm-hmm.
They want you available for their projects. They're not thinking about the long-term career vision, which is really a manager's forte in most cases. Yeah. Some managers do operate a little more like agents. I find my most successful collaborations are with people who I think take that sort of career-focused approach and let me just get into the day-to-day of selling.
And selling, yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think that's something when you're thinking about putting your team together, when you have that initial meeting, learning how your manager comes into managing. Because like you said, there are quite a few people who start in the agency world and decide to move to management. And sometimes they decide to move to management because they actually don't like the hyper focus of the selling and they want to be involved in this sort of more career focused brand, overall thing. And sometimes they move into management and they sort of still have the agency mentality. And we're not saying that person can't be effective for you, but you just should know what style of management that you're bringing on your team. And to your point about sort of putting the whole team together, I think a manager, like you said, is going to be the person that is going to tell you when it's time to bring on a lawyer, when you maybe need to have a publicist. It's not that your agent won't be involved in that conversation, but that should start between you and your manager, assuming you have both.
Yeah, and I find a lot of times I will have a conversation with the manager and be like, hey, listen, I think this is a pretty big opportunity. Maybe it's time to bring a publicist on and kind of just wind you up and set you off on a path so that you can go and have that conversation and sort of run that project, if you will. But I think it's important. It's just important to know how people collaborate because while I personally think that this is an ideal partnership, other people operate differently and they're not right or they're not wrong and we're not right, we're not wrong. But I think for me, as we always talk about, I think we're looking at this as a corporation and what best serves the needs of the corporation. If everyone in your business is dedicated to sales, to getting product onto the shelf, who's running the day-to-day? Who's making sure that the warehouse is stocked? Who's making sure, like those kinds of things. So I think that for me, I love being able to focus on my job and having a manager that I can trust to just run the business, as it were. And I think that's the primary purpose to bring on a manager also.
Yeah. And another thing too, we've talked a lot about sort of like, if you have a manager and you bring on an agent or, we've sort of been talking about, if you have both, one thing I would say is if you happen to start by being repped at an agency first, and at some point the idea pops into your head that you may want to bring on a manager, please speak with your agent about that and don't just go off on your own and decide to bring someone new onto the team without having that conversation with your agent. Very early in my tenure in starting this career, I had a client recommend a friend of theirs to me who was looking for a manager and took a meeting with this person, and the meeting was lovely and I offered them representation, and like 3 hours later my phone rings and I pick it up and I like the screaming what are you doing talking to my client? La, 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 la. And this person, I was like, okay, hello, this is new. You know, and I think this was quite some time ago. I hope that some of the screaming is gone from the business a bit. But as I come to find out, what had happened is that this potential new client of mine hadn't informed their agent that they were thinking of bringing on management. The agent would have liked to have been part of the conversation of identifying managers that they already had relationships with. They didn't know me from Adam. They had never heard of me. And so, you know, it just was never going to work because that's the way the relationship started. So, and I actually ended up bowing out of that because I was like, you have a longstanding relationship with this agent. This is the last way that we should be starting our relationship. So communication, no matter which way you're going, if you have a manager and you think it's time to bring on an agent or anyone else on your team, you shouldn't be going off and trying to find that on your own. And if you start with an agent and you want to bring a manager, a lawyer, or anyone else, go to the source. They're going to have managers that they work with. They're going to have relationships. They're going to have people that they already have, you know, a rapport established with like we do. And so that's actually the best referral too.
I think another difference between agents and managers is really like the focus. I think for an agent in particular, we're looking for short-term opportunities. We're looking for that next sale, that next job, what's in front of us right now. What are the breakdowns? What are the breakdowns that are coming up in the near future? And then we're also looking like immediate career advancement. Whereas I feel like for a manager, it's really about nurturing your career.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right about that. I'm more concerned with developing talent if I'm starting with someone who's sort of brand new to the industry, or developing someone to that next level. They want to level up. They want to go from guest stars to series regular, something like that. And so we're talking about the strategy around that. And then just, again, that overall career management. So that's where, you know, I'm not necessarily looking for those short-term opportunities. And you want, ideally, in our opinion, to have one of each on your team so that you're really getting that full scope.
Just to talk about too, some of the differences on the agent side is we do have a fiduciary responsibility to our clients. We are state licensed, we are bonded. There are licensing, as I said, requirements for agents that don't exist for managers. But then the advantage of a manager, I think, would be smaller rosters. It's going to be someone that you speak to day to day. Can you speak on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important to understand just how much preparation goes into becoming an agent and getting bonded. And there's a huge expense to that too. So remember that any agent that you're talking to has, you know, there's been a significant investment on their part to go through all of that licensing and bonding. And that is something to keep in mind. Anyone can just start a management company because they don't have to be vetted like that by the state. And so you really want to, when you're talking about bringing, you know, when you're interviewing managers to come onto your team, you just really want to talk about and understand what their history is and sort of how they see the business, because it is, the barrier to entry for managers is so much lower than it is for agents. You know, I think in California, technically managers aren't supposed to procure work in the way that
I know when I started, that was a very big deal. It seems like that's really loosened.
Obviously, you know, we're involved in that, but it is because of that fiduciary responsibility. And so whenever, you know, if I find an opportunity for a client that I can kind of bring, I'm always making sure that my agents that are on the team are actually the ones closing that, because they have that responsibility.
Yeah, the worst is I've had managers close deals and hand them to me at the 11th hour with a problem. Like, hey, they blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, I bet not.
Because you're not supposed to be negotiating that. So, yeah, absolutely. And
go ahead, please.
No, I was going to say, like, I am happy to, I'm like, I want to do my role. Yeah. You're the negotiating expert. And of course, you know, I love it when agents say, hey, this is what I'm thinking of asking. This is what we're going to plan on doing. Can you take a second look? Of course, we want to be the second eye.
Yeah, that's, especially on larger projects, larger roles, that's going to be there's going to be a lot of back and forth that you're not necessarily privy to. But that's happening behind the scenes with a good working relationship.
Right.
That's very key. And that's why you want to involve everyone already on the team with any new additions to the team with that conversation, because it can get, we have people we like, but also we have people we don't like working with, or people that we have had problems with, or whatever reason we don't necessarily jive with that person.
Maybe you just don't see the business the same way.
Yeah.
And when you do, let's say you say to your agent, hey, I want to bring someone on the team, and they introduce you to 5 or 6 different people. You go off and take meetings. When you do actually sign with someone, you really should take the time to kind of send a team email and be like, hey, everyone, we're all working together now. Here's everyone's contact info. They may not have worked together or shared a client before. And so it's really your responsibility, again, as the CEO of your business, to be guiding that communication.
Yeah. So now let's talk about when is the right time to bring on an agent or a manager. Let's start with what we kind of said earlier. There is significant overlap these days on these jobs. Many managers get the breakdowns. They can submit. They can even close deals, especially smaller deals. And many managers or many agents can provide sort of longer term career guidance. They're not going to be as specific as a manager or as hands-on as a manager. But especially at the beginning of your career, it's okay to have one. I think when I was starting out, and correct me if you have a different experience, when I was starting out, it was really the emphasis was get an agent first. Mm-hmm. And then when you have something to manage, get a manager. I really feel like that's flipped.
Yeah.
Because I feel like the development side is so much on you guys.
Yeah, I feel like it has flipped. I feel like it's interesting. It's like there's, for whatever reason, agencies just don't have the time these days to do a lot of development. And I think agencies have, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but have moved towards really wanting those from referrals from managers. That's primarily how you're going to find new clients. So there is this need for a manager at the beginning, and then I think there needs to be something to manage can kind of kick in,
yes.
right? And so you may find that sort of mid-career, you may actually, ideally, I think most managers want to be there for the long run, but I feel like I have also found people kind of exiting having management sort of in the middle of things when they have an agent that's kind of getting them going. And then once they get to that level where it's kind of too much for just the agent and the client to work with, they kind of bring on management again.
Yeah, I think you're right that is a trend. I personally believe, and I would never tell anyone how to run their business, despite the channel. But I personally believe if I were an actor, I would want to sign with one person ever. Yeah. One manager, one agent, and really build together and have that. So I would say look for someone that you want to be with long term, because I think that just yields much better results down the road than sort of hopping in and out and changing up. But, again, your career is going to dictate what you need to bring on and when. Yeah. I think the bigger question is not job title, but rather who's passionate about you. If you showcase at your, college, or if you're doing a short film and you get discover some manager comes up to you or some agent comes up to you and they're crazy about your work and they're really excited to get you into the market and oh my God, I can't wait to tell my casting friends about you. I think you should consider signing with that person regardless of job title.
Absolutely.
Whether they're an agent, whether they're a manager. I think that's just real. That's more important than anything. Yeah. And I think a lot of people, they just want to get the yes. They just want to get onto a roster and figure it out. I don't really love that approach.
Yeah. Having an agent just to have an agent on IMDb, or having a manager just to have a manager on IMDb, I've never found that that's worked out well for anyone.
Yeah, and vice versa. For an agent, anytime I've tried to sign because I'm I need this category, I need X, Y, or Z, it never works. I have to be passionate about that performer.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Something to note too is who sends the appointment is not always relevant to who did the work to generate the appointment.
Yeah, that's really interesting too. I find that, because agents are the ones that are supposed to procure work, there are a lot of casting offices who have been doing this a very long time and know that they're also trying to not run afoul of that rule, I guess, in California. Maybe I think it's a law, but I think it functions more as a rule at this point. And so, quite often it is something to remember that, it might actually be your manager that's doing the submission, but the audition is going to come through the agency. Again, I don't care. Right? Yeah. I am just happy. I do not get territorial about that, because ultimately the point is for the client to be getting the most opportunities to work as possible. But in terms of evaluating sort of if your manager is working for you versus your agent, I really appreciate you bringing that up, actually.
Well, and we see the opposite sometimes too, because I think especially mid-career, a lot of times casting assumes the manager is like in control of the schedule.
Sure.
So they'll send it to the manager. Yeah. So just know that, like, sometimes I'll have actors meet with me like, hey, listen, I feel like all my appointments are coming through you. Maybe I want to switch up my management. I'm always quick to say two things. Number one, that's not what you want your manager spending their time doing to begin with. But then number two, like, it's just not indicative of, generally speaking, we're all doing the work.
Yeah. And quite often, both of us are submitting you for the same thing, because we are all so in sync about your branding. And so then it's just sort of whoever's submission casting happens to click on to send the appointment.
Yeah. It helps being first alphabetically.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Which is so funny, because like Satara, before DD.
That's why you get all my appointments.
There it is. We solved it.
Thank you so much for watching. If you got value out of this video, please click that thumbs up button, click subscribe and the notification bell. That way you get alerted every time we put out a new video. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you the next time.